Today we're going to look at the Maya, and the title is Chapter 16, Section number 2. One thing to remember about the Maya is that they were living in separate independent city-states, sort of like the Mesopotamians that we've learned about earlier in the year, and the Greeks. They really were separated into independent dwellings, and these type of cities slash villages slash sometimes empires were all based on independent cultures. However, they also had shared characteristics with some of the other city-states in the region, and that's why it's kind of lumped into being known as the Maya culture. Geography would be first. We'll take a quick look at the map as to where the Maya were from. This green area here, which is modern-day Yucatan Peninsula, this is the region of the Maya homeland. Now, what you can see are some of these major city-states and how far spread out they are. You don't see a capital city because, of course, these are all independent city-states. Okay, so there's two things to know about the homeland region. It's generally in southern Mexico, but it does extend down into northern Central America. There's two parts of it. There's the highland region, which is actually in the south, and it's called the highland region because of the mountainous terrain. Then in the north, there's called the lowland region, which is characterized by forest and also portions of the Yucatan Peninsula. Now, one thing to remember is that Mayan culture is predicated on the mother culture of this region, which was the Olmec that we've learned about in the past. And the Olmec come into play from 1200 to 400 BC. By 250 AD, most historians would consider the Maya culture as a true civilization, meeting those major characteristics of civilization as we've learned throughout the year. Capital letter B will talk about urban centers, so we're going to take a look at some of the major cities. The classic period for the Maya is from 250 to 900 AD. This is when the Mayan peoples built most of their cities. Some of the key city-states to take note of would be Tikal. Tikal is a major Mayan city-state, which was located in northern Guatemala. You have Copan, which is one of the southernmost city-states. Palenque is out into the western region. You have Uxmal in the north. And then you have Chichen Itza, which is the only one of these cities that I've actually visited myself. Chichen Itza is located in the Yucatan Peninsula as well. The rulers of these cities would be god kings, similar to Egyptian pharaohs. I'll take a look at the map real quick to show you. Here's Chichen Itza in the north. Here's Uxmal. Palenque out in the west, Copan, and then Tikal sort of in the center. Not a capital city, but probably the largest of all of these cities. Chichen Itza is pretty large as well. Okay, next. The cities were centers for religious ceremonies and trade. They were very well populated. Many of them had over 10,000 people. They did play athletics. Each Mayan city-state had a stadium, and they had a ball court near the center plaza, which they played a game of athletic contest. Today, the game is called Juegos de Pelotas by the Spanish, but back in those times, the game had very political and religious implications. The Maya believed that they could regulate the cycles of the sun and the moon by playing the game properly. The object of the game was to keep a heavy rubber ball in motion without using hands or feet. Athletes would try to hit the ball with their hips and their torso, and sometimes their head, through a small ring near the stadium wall. The ball was a metaphor for the movement of the sun, the stars, and their regularity. The Maya thought that if they played the game properly, they would be able to please the gods and keep the regular agricultural processes going. The implications of the game were pretty amazing, though. Sometimes the losing team, the entire team and the coach would be sacrificed to the gods. Other times, the winning team during certain festivals may be sacrificed to the gods. I'll probably have a video for my students here about this game. That's quite interesting here in the next few days. Next is capital letter C, agriculture and trade support cities. The Maya society was based on city-states. The city-states were linked through trade and also alliances, as I had mentioned earlier. Some of the items that the Mayan peoples generally traded would be salt, flint, feathers, shells, honey, cotton, jade, and tobacco. Actually, if you were studying the Maya, you might learn that money actually did grow on trees for them. They used cacao beans or chocolate beans, cocoa beans, as their currency among some of the city-states. Now, yes, that actually does grow on trees or vines, but The thing about it is that the ruling classes sort of regulated where those things could be grown. It doesn't just grow naturally in much abundance. So you couldn't really get rich on counterfeiting by growing your own trees. Next is agriculture. They focused on corn, beans, and squash. They also practiced slash and burn farming, which we learned about earlier in the year. Eventually, they advanced to farming with terraces. And most Mayan peoples were actually farmers. They lived outside of the cities. The vast majority of them were generally farmers. Capital letter D, we'll talk about kingdoms being built on dynasty. So they had dynastic systems. The social class system would be something along the lines of this. The noble class would be made up of priests and high warriors. The middle class would be made up of merchants and artisans. And then the lower class would be made up of peasants, farmers, so on and so forth. Next is going to be talking about religion. Roman numeral number 2, religion shapes Maya life. Some of their religious practices were polytheistic, of course. They believed in many gods, gods of corn, death, rain, war. Gods could be evil, good, or possibly both. The Maya would pray to their gods, as we mentioned earlier, through sacrificial offerings of food, flowers, incense, and also human blood. Human sacrifice became a really important part of religious practice. Usually the people who were sacrificed would be captured enemies in battle. One thing to note is that the Maya, while they did perform human sacrifice, they did not do it at a rate that was anywhere close to what the Aztec people did. We're going to learn about in section 3. One of the ways they also did human sacrifice was called bloodletting. They may cut certain parts of their hand or other parts of their body, and they would spill blood on top of those large temples that you may see in the Maya world, and that therefore they would then be allowed to enter the temple after they had spilled the blood. So this is a sacrifice to the gods. Next is capital letter B. We'll talk about how math relates here. The Maya used mathematics to create a calendar system, and they also studied astronomy. They basically had 2 calendars. One was based on religious gods. The other was based on the sun. The one that's based on the sun is really similar to our calendar. The Mayan math system included the concept of the zero and was based on the number 20. So their base number was 20, and then they went from there. Capital letter C, we'll talk about written language preserving history. One of the ways that they wrote was through glyphs. Glyphs are a short term for hieroglyphic symbols. The Maya writing system included over 800 glyphs. Some Maya glyphs stood for whole words, while others represented just syllables. The Maya would record their important historical events by carving them into stone or by writing them on bark paper, which was known as a codex. One of the most famous books was called the Popol Vuh. It's an ancient Mayan book that depicts the highland Maya creation story. So the southern region would be where this book would have originated. When the Spanish came in the late 1400s, early 1500s, they thought that the Maya were practicing devil worshiping, and because they were polytheistic. And so a lot of the books that the Maya had wrote that were around were destroyed by the Spanish, either burned or smashed up. So we would know a whole lot more about the Maya, but the Spanish had destroyed a lot of those works. Next, we'll talk about the Maya decline here in Roman numeral 3. By the 900s AD, the Maya had severely declined in power. We're not exactly sure why they went out of power, but here are some possible ideas. Capital A, invasions. One group called the Toltec, which were the predecessors of the Aztec, we know did invade Mayan lands coming from the north. This is kind of where the Toltec were from, up in this area of Tula right here. And they came over here into the Mayan lands and may have caused some to migrate away or other forms of destruction. Infighting, as we said, these Mayan city-states are separated. So by the 700s, we know that warfare among the various city-states was increasing. This had a major effect because if you're having war, that's going to affect trade, it's going to affect your economics, it's going to force people out of cities because cities are going to be areas that might be attacked, or they may close themselves into walled off areas within cities due to fear of death, capture, slavery, human sacrifice. So those are all parts of the factorization there. Next, let's take a look at capital C. Overpopulation is a major factor. High populations, overuse of the land may have led to food shortages, famine, and disease. We've seen this throughout the course of history. One thing that we can rule out, one thing that I would like you to rule out as far as your look at why the Maya declined would be the Spanish. They were not a part of that, okay? What I want to say is that the Spanish don't show up until 1500. We know that the Maya were in a major state of decline by, of course, 900 AD. So there's about 600 years gap there where the Spanish, they may have run into some smaller, weaker city-states that were still around by the Maya, and they may have overrun those. But as far as like wiping the Maya out or having a full-scale war against the Maya, that just did not exist. So when we go to the quiz, if I ask you a question on short answers, such as, what are some factors that led to the Maya decline? The Spanish being a part of that is not a factor there. Okay. All right. We want to look at one more thing. There is a nice breakdown chart here about the Maya right here, talking about the rise and the fall. Talks about some of their basic traits of civilization, some of the reasons why they became powerful, and some of the weaknesses that led to their decline. Okay. So these are some of the possible factors there. Now that can be found in your textbook. Of course, it's on page 449. And then down here, you're going to see some looks at Maya architecture. You'll see the temples that I'm talking about here at the top, all built of stone. You'll see some steles, which are kind of like what they built in Africa, stone pillars that run vertically. And then here's the ball court. This is the famous ball court at Chichen Itza, which is one that I have actually been at. I actually stood on that court there. It's the largest ancient Mesoamerican ball court. The object was to hit with your hips or your thighs a very small and heavy rubber ball up through this hoop. And if you could do that, you could actually win the game if you just hit it once. Okay, so you have pyramids, you have temples, you have ball courts, a lot of different Mayan forms of architecture. Here is a jaguar. For the Maya, the jaguar was a very important spiritual beast, okay? One of the most important, and it's the toughest or most fierce beast of the Mesoamerican jungle.